Great. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's session where we're looking at disasters and crises in the Caribbean region. My preferred theme, an unofficial theme for this morning's discussions, would be something along the lines of when push comes to shove. And I think all of us as journalists in here would understand what I mean by that. That here in this region, push can come to shove far more easily than in other countries where, there is space, there are resources, there are massive populations, and there are all kinds of mechanisms that predispose them to respond to risks, disasters, and crises of different varieties. In our case, push can come to shove really quickly and in most deadly fashion. And as journalists, during those occasions, those kinds of occasions, we know that we are hampered by several phenomena. Let me say challenged by several phenomena. One has to do with, as I said, the shortage of resources, the fact that we are small spaces, and there are very few prospects for relocation of population centers. But we're also challenged by other factors, such as nowadays social media content. Though we would all know, and some of us who have been through crises, disasters, perils before would know that when push comes to shove, many of the social media combatants, most of them, find themselves under their beds, while the rest of us are out there trying to get the stories. So that's that. We also have the phenomenon of what we often describe as parachute journalism. Those guys who think they can do it better than us, but who are totally unfamiliar with the terrain, and they become sort of de facto part of the challenges that we already confront, because they're coming in, move aside, and have this belief that they're capable of covering our stories better than us. We have now, and it's linked to social media practice to some extent, which is the whole fact of and presence of disaster porn. People just sort of, for some reason, they love to witness people in danger and people under very difficult circumstances. And for some reason, that has become an attraction that people thrive on, particularly in the social media space. Those of us who have been following events in the Middle East and the genocide that continues, notwithstanding most recent developments in Gaza, would have heard um, our US colleague Van Jones making the unfortunate reference to the fact that young people these days are on their phones and they're witnessing all this disaster porn, not his words, my words. And they're seeing dead Gaza baby, did he get dead Gaza baby? And for some reason, people thought that was funny and something attractive to listen to. So we are confronted with that kind of challenge as well. Now, when I look, you put that alongside the quotes, and I asked Kiran and Inshan and so to pull together the quotes that have come from colleagues who have contributed to this publication on disasters and crises in the Caribbean region. And the review that they have done, they're very useful and I would say unprecedented. They send this to the colleagues in the Pacific and they'll be so jealous of us. But when I look at the comments, I mean, it greatly impressed me, and I think it should impress everyone that among our ranks are journalists who have this level of awareness and sensitivity to the needs of our populations at times of crisis and disaster. And I think that's an asset that we bring to it, that in addition to simply being good citizens, And I think that one of the comments I think that came from Carla was the manner in which communities rally at times of disaster. And we are members of those communities in our small countries. In addition to that, we are holding out a professional obligation to do the best, to be the best at what we do, which is journalism. So this morning's session is not about my views, it's about the views and the feelings, the sentiments of people who have contributed to this publication. Really impressive and unprecedented at this scale. The ACM has done this kind of work before, but there has never been anything like this that has been published before with respect to journalism and Caribbean crises. So, want to get straight into the official part of the program. And we have an opening statement from our friend, Dr. Paul Hector, who's advisor for communication and information at the UNESCO Office for the Caribbean. So, Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Wesley. Thank you very much, Kiran, and everyone who has been a part of making this possible. So it is really my great pleasure to be here with you today and also to give opening and welcome remarks on today's webinar, Disaster Resilience in the Caribbean, Insights from the New Casebook. Now, this event is truly more than just a presentation of research findings. It is indeed a celebration of Caribbean leadership, innovation, and determination in the face of adversity. As you know, we are often regarded as the first or second most at risk to disasters region in the world. Today, of course, as we know, it is also an important part of MIC's and UNESCO's activities to mark the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. Now, the theme for this year's day is Fund Resilience, Not Disasters. And I think you would agree with me that this is both timely and urgent. And the theme reminds us that resilience is not an accident. It is a result of deliberate choices, sustained investments, and strong partnerships. And so today's launch of the Casebook is an excellent example of how these investments can take shape in the Caribbean and enhance our resilience. And just to share with you some statistics, the Global Assessment Report by UNDRR tells us that while direct disaster losses average about $202 billion annually, the real cost, the actual cost, when we take into account the wider economic and social impacts of disasters, are somewhere near $2.3 trillion. So in other words, failing to invest in preparedness is costing us far more than prevention actions ever could. Now, I'd like to spend a little time to really focus on MIC. And I want to salute the tremendous leadership of Ms. Kiran Maharaj, as we know, President of the Media Institute of the Caribbean, and of course, her extraordinary team, Wesley Gibbons, of course, and others. And truly, I mean, it is their vision and their persistence which have made this and other projects possible. And as we know, over many years, Kiran, MIC, they have been powerful advocates for strengthening the role of media in disaster preparedness and response. And of course, this new casebook just stands as yet another testament to this tireless commitment. Of course, I want to also extend congratulations to the authors of the 7 case studies whose careful research and powerful storytelling gives voice to the lived experiences of communities in Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and of course, Trinidad and Tobago. Together, you have created a one-of-a-kind, a groundbreaking Caribbean product. And I should add, this is something that is not only relevant to our region, but also holds lessons of great value for other small island developing states around the world, and I'm sure for other countries as well. Now, this casebook reminds us of a very crucial truth, and that is simply this: the impact of a disaster is shaped not only by the force of the hazard, but also by the effectiveness of communication, preparedness, and coordinated response. And so by capturing lessons learned from past crises, whether hurricanes, floods, droughts, volcanic eruptions, or health emergencies, you have documented in the casebook lessons that can really equip us with practical guidance for the future. And of course, it demonstrates how journalists and media organizations, even when they're working with limited resources, can play life-saving roles in keeping communities informed, connected, and resilient. And this, of course, aligns perfectly with the aims of the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, which calls on all of us, governments, intergovernmental organizations, the media, civil society, the private sector, and others to invest now in measures that reduce risk and build resilience. And of course, by documenting lessons learned from real crises and sharing practical pathways for improvement, this casebook directly contributes to this global call. Now, this casebook, which developed, by MIC, is also an important addition to other ongoing collaborations between UNESCO and other regional partners. For example, the Public Media Alliance, the Caribbean Broadcasting Union, the Association of Caribbean Media Workers, and of course, our partner, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. Together, through these initiatives, we are advancing and expanding the capacity of Caribbean media to serve communities before, during, and after disasters. For example, through the Data Journalism for Disaster Preparedness project, newsrooms across Barbados, Grenada, and Trinidad and Tobago are turning raw data into compelling and accessible public information. Our Media in Crisis Preparedness and Response program has supported innovations such as Radio Box Studios that provide communities with low-cost, portable community media systems which can be operational during disasters and when traditional systems fail. Also, a product of the Caribbean, the Rapid Post-Disaster Needs Assessment Survey for media institutions was based on Caribbean experiences that came out of Hurricane Beryl. And this assessment tool is now available in Arabic, in Chinese, English, of course, French, Russian, and Spanish. And this in itself is a testimony that the Caribbean and its experiences can lead the world, can help to shape the rest of the world. And this survey, it looks at basically ensuring how we can quickly assess how the newsrooms and media sector are affected in the aftermath of a disaster, so we can mobilize the right support so that media can continue to provide their very vital and life-saving information. And of course, from what we've learned through surveys such as this, help us to build back better and to prepare for other disasters. And I'd like to share with you another initiative that UNESCO has launched in the form of an online training course on artificial intelligence, drones, and geographical information systems, or GIS, for disaster reporting. And with these tools, we are seeking to equip Caribbean journalists with advanced tools to deliver accurate, ethical, and timely coverage when it matters most. You will be seeing information via social media about how you can apply to this course, and I encourage all of you to sign up. Now, all of these efforts which I've just described are guided by the same principle, and that is simply this: trusted information can be as life-saving as food, water, or shelter in a crisis. And so together with partners like Sedima, who are also embodying this spirit, we are seeking to mobilize proactive investments, capacity building, and preparedness rather than reactive responses. So colleagues, as I close, as we know, the Caribbean remains one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world. The data tells us that every $1 US invested in resilience can save at least US $7 in disaster losses. Yet too often, investment in preparedness lags behind the scale of the risk we face. We have to change that. This casebook is therefore both a repository of knowledge and a call to action. It challenges us to invest in communication systems, training, and partnerships that will enable media to play its indispensable role in resilience building. In this way, it contributes not only to the Caribbean's resilience, but also to the global mission, which is being promoted through events like today, the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, that of funding resilience, not disasters. So, on behalf of UNESCO, I wish to commend the Media Institute of the Caribbean, the authors of the case studies, and also all other partners for their extraordinary contributions. And I trust that the insights shared today will inspire deeper collaboration, stronger investment in preparedness, and a greater commitment to ensuring that the Caribbean not only survives, but thrives in the face of growing risk. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Paul Hector, UNESCO. Now I'm going to hand over to Kiran Maharaj, who is going to lead off the panel discussion.
Thank you, Wesley. And I just want to say a big thank you to Dr. Paul Hector and UNESCO for supporting this work. But not only this, but they have supported several other projects related to this topic this year. We started this year with our disaster risk and resilience training webinar series. And that also formed part of our incubator, where what we did was we actually had some media houses in the region, there were 8 of them, who underwent self-assessments and understood what they need to do to become more resilient and more prepared. Because as you all know, whenever we have situations such as this, it's very difficult for media houses to operate in the circumstances that we do, especially small media houses. So thank you again to UNESCO and to Paul for making all of that possible. Right, so this is why we're here this morning, to get into the meat of the matter. And we are going to do that by talking to the journalists who were behind this project. And so I'm going to introduce them to you, and I'm sure to those of you who are online already, you know a lot of these faces and these names, but we have with us, and I'm going to use first names because that's how we're going to get comfortable here. We have Carla with us, Trinidad and Tobago. We have Alicia. Alicia, where are you? Dominica. I'm hoping Alicia can hear us. Yes. We have Esther with us, Barbados. We have Linda from Grenada. We have Teresa representing Antigua and Barbuda. We have apologies from Mr. Kenton Chance. It is election season in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He got called away urgently on coverage, and also from Nazima Raghuber from Guyana, who is currently on a fellowship and overseas. So let's start. A couple of ground rules, everybody. If you have questions, and we're going to make the floor open and available to you, please put your questions in the chat box. And if you want to ask your questions directly, we also encourage that. So we'll do a mix. But if you want to use your microphone, please use the emoji button that is located at the base of your Zoom screen. Raise your hand and we will get to you. So one of the things I wanted to point out, and you all will see it in the handbook and the case study manual, is that based on the information and data we collected for the Caribbean region, approximately $556.2 million is what it cost in damages and losses, but that excludes the estimates for rebuilding and insurance claims. So you heard Dr. Hector talk about trillions, and yes, the truth is it can go into trillions. And we've all been subjected to all sorts of disasters in this region, but I'm sure that the journalists who work on this study were able to find some of what may have been alarming, because we paid very close attention in this study to what happens in the communication process. So I want to jump to Carla. Carla, I'm going to throw out this question to everyone, and your names are in alphabetical order on my piece of paper, so that's why I'm jumping to you first. But in going through all of the data and looking at what transpired in the case study you did, what was the most alarming aspect of the communications and messaging that you saw and that really stood out for you?
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Happy disaster. Uh, happy
Risk and
disaster
reduction
risk
day.
and reduction day to all of you, and thank you for joining. And thank you to Kiran, UNESCO, and MIC, and all my colleagues for this project. I'm very proud of it, and I hope you all all our listeners enjoyed reading it and learned from it. To Kieran's question, I think there are two parts that I see which are the most alarming things for me. The first is there's a general complacency in terms of the uptake of these warnings. So in the case study that I did, which was the 2018 floods, the Met Office and the ODPM, which is the Office of Disaster Management and Preparedness in Trinidad, they both released press releases and communicated the risk that the potential hazards from flooding well before the actual event. But I think in Trinidad and Tobago, because flooding is such a perennial event, that even though people see it and they are generally aware of it and take probably basic precautions, it sort of kind of becomes a boy who cried wolf situation where people just don't really take it that seriously. Every year it happens, every year we survive, and this is not really something that this is just now a part of my life. And I think that because of that, what consequently happens, and what happened in the 2018 floods, is that the response ended up being reactionary, because then when people finally saw the extent, I mean, granted, it was a phenomenon. When people actually saw the actual effect of what was going to happen, then people started to react and scramble basically to protect, life, property, and really try to deal with the situation. And you can see it both with the victims of the disaster as well as the agencies who are supposed to respond. And I think that sort of reactionary response is something that really was it was really evident during the response to see how long it took in some cases for the actual authorities to reach victims, and a lot of communities had to come together on their own to resolve the issues, simply because it was just so reactionary.
Thanks for that, Carla. Now, folks, what I want you to understand is that we did a series of case studies that touched on different kinds of disasters that we face in our region. And I want to bring on Alicia now, because Alicia, you talked about Tropical Storm Erica. And we know that we are prone to tropical storms, even outside of the rainy season sometimes. But Alicia, share with us, what was the most alarming aspect of the communications and messaging that stood out for you in that study?
Sure, thank you. Just a precursor, I am having a bit of internet connectivity, so if my video goes off, it's just I can continue the discussion. So I around August 26 in 2015. And initially I wanted to focus on, I thought of focusing on Hurricane Maria because it was this well talked about, huge and well-known storm. But then I thought to myself, let me speak from a position of experience, because I was in Dominica at the time that Tropical Storm Erica happened. And there were varying aspects of it that stood out to me. In terms of alarming, I don't know if I would call it alarming or disappointing. Storm Erica happened. It was not supposed to be a tropical storm. And I say that because I remember going to bed knowing that it was supposed to be a trough system. And yes, it would have developed into a hurricane, most likely after it passed Dominica. However, overnight, while people slept, it became a tropical storm. And it's hard to. So, the first thing that stood out to me in terms of communication that I would consider alarming or disappointing would have been the lack of an effective national early warning system. Now, the National Hurricane Center, it didn't issue a tropical storm warning for Dominica. And by the time the local Met Office there would have found out that it developed into a tropical storm, it would have been too late for a lot of people. As I mentioned, it developed overnight. And at the time, we didn't have the capacity to send out these mass alarms. There were no local happens, the drill is supposed to be, an alert goes off and you're supposed to hear that. We didn't have that. And so a lot of communities became isolated because we didn't have an effective early warning system, and we didn't have localized early warning systems at all. During the disaster, the telecoms network went down as well. And that limited communications during and even after the storm, because although Dominica has a municipal type of governance in terms of having village councils, these village councils did not have the unconventional telecoms instruments that we need. For example, there were no ham radios. So when the telecoms network went down, those parts of the island became isolated. Now, there was 7 parishes that were affected by that. So imagine 7 of, I believe, 10 parishes in Dominica were isolated somewhat from each other with no communication whatsoever. Another thing that stood out again, besides the local authorities not being prepared, although we were in what was approaching the peak of the hurricane season, individuals themselves were not prepared. Carla mentioned the complacency. We sometimes get too accustomed to, oh, well, it's a hurricane season, it may or may not happen. And if we a hurricane, we panic and we buy out toilet paper, no pun intended, but we buy out toilet paper at the supermarket because it's a hurricane. But for any lesser storm, we kind of take a laid back approach to it. We would probably, batten down, that's maybe, or ensure that we have water. But we don't take it as seriously. And for me, those were the alarming aspects of Tropical Storm Erica in 2015.
Thanks for that, Alicia. You reminded me that one of the important things that we've done with UNESCO is to have had content producers from throughout the Caribbean develop PSAs. And we had a few recipients of that regionally. They were awarded for their content, and we have been distributing that throughout the Caribbean, and it's on the MIC YouTube page so that anybody can download it. There are also radio versions. Everything is up on the MIC website, mediainstituteofthecaribbean.com. But the reason why we did this was because we realized that the process of information should not stop, and we cannot wait for those periods where, as Wesley says, push come to shove, we really need to be very proactive with what we do. So one of the greatest lessons about communication that I think we learned quickly in this region was during COVID. And I want to hop over to Esther now because she did her study on COVID and the experience in Barbados. Esther, the same question to you. What was that alarming aspect of the communications and messaging to you?
Yes, thank you very much, Karan. I must say thank you to UNESCO and my other colleagues. Yes, COVID was very different than every other disaster that you looked at in the case studies because it was a prolonged disaster. It lasted about 2.5 years, and it was something that the whole world experienced. So I found what was difficult was carving out your information within all of the information that people can get access to. And I found that a lot of people were seeing information coming out of the United States, the UK, Canada, etc. And they were thinking that that's the information that applied to Barbados. So it was really hard to make sure that your message got across. And there was it was so persistent. You always had to keep the attention of people. It was very directive. Things were changing. It was dynamic. And as journalists, we were all part of it. We were all experiencing it. So I felt that basically trying to get that information out, have people understand what the rules and regulations were for Barbados rather than for Florida, let's just say. And then we had to also compete with a lot of influencers, bloggers. There was a lot of different types of information coming out, a lot of misinformation. So it was hard to make sure that people understand what was beneficial for them as Barbadians. So that I would say was very challenging and alarming too.
Thanks for that, Esther. I know we had many other issues that all of us would have experienced as journalists and media during COVID. So we're going to come to recommendations at the end, and I think that that is really going to sum up a lot of what we're hearing from everyone on the panel. Linda, you talked about the issue of coastal protection in your case study. And interestingly, over the weekend, I was looking at an article in from one of the media outlets. I can't remember which one, but they were talking about airports in our islands, and were now at risk because what is happening is that the airport runways, you all know a lot of them are built along our coastlines. They are now in danger with rising sea levels and so on, and coastal erosion and all of these things. But tell us, Linda, in your case study, what did you find alarming about the communications and the public awareness?
Well, good morning to all my colleagues and those who are listening on. What I found to be, like Alicia, I don't even say if it's alarming or lacking or disappointing, was that the community that I focused on Silver Rise and Coastal, was in the northern part of Grenada. It is not like very urban, but a mix of rural and urban. And the people in that community were living and experiencing sea level rise, and no discussion, no open consultation was taking place with regard to this experience that is part of climate change. And it's as if nobody couldn't be bothered. And then you had the government of the day took action when a businessman realized that his business was eventually going to go underwater, and the sea was fighting and literally under his property, and he raised an alarm. And after he raised an alarm, the government took action. But in communicating that to the people, there was a lack of informing them that, listen, you may have to relocate. These are the things that could happen. So I discovered that there was a lack of communication to deal with an instance here of what sea level rise, one of the things that is associated with climate change. I was really surprised. No media was said that this is the case, no community consultation, no national consultation, no heavy focus on sea level rise, even if we speak about climate change and weather. But that little aspect of sea level rise and how we can literally change our course, there was no big discussion on that. It was probably the people are saying, look, the sea is coming in, and the sea is just coming in until it reached danger point, and then action was taken.
Thanks, Linda. And I think that that's one of the areas of the reporting in our region that we really need to examine. Because if you all know what is happening in the Marshall Islands and in the Pacific, with those countries there, you'll understand that we can face the same dilemma. And so we need to be very aware of what is happening and understand how we can deal with it as citizens. I want to come to Teresa. Teresa, you had an interesting one. I mean, I went to Dominica after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, and I never thought I would have experienced anything that it looked like Jurassic Park when I got to Dominica. I remember that. But you looked at Antigua and Barbuda and Hurricane Irma, and I know that there was quite a bit of discussion at UN level and at the UNGA that year. And it still baffles me that, to me, this is the existential threat when we think of disaster in the region. To me, it's hurricanes. We've been fortunate this year to not have had, the kind of experience, but the thing is we never know when, and it becomes so unpredictable. So Teresa, tell us, a little bit about what surprised you about the communications.
Well, in terms of communication, rather, it was quite alarming because whereas in Antigua and Barbuda, you have a lot of media houses. Barbuda literally you have Abundant Life and there's the Barbuda channel. So even from that angle, there was not much to go on. So at one point, the entire power lines, everything was down. So there was no way to connect with individuals to find out what was happening, what was going on. So that was a huge gap and a problem to that extent. So you had to literally rely on, I think it was VH communication at one point. The Prime Minister, even before the all clear signal was given, had to go over by helicopter to really get an understanding of the extent of the damage. So that was it's still lacking in terms of that, where it's just not much to go on. I think right now, one of the only reporters per se would have gone overseas now to be trained and should be coming back to Barbuda as it relates to the state-owned entity, there's collaboration and cooperation in terms of setting up a more reliable set on Barbuda so that the communication flow is improved to some extent. So that was really a serious problem, and it has been addressed to this point.
Thanks, Teresa. Folks, the two journalists who could not be here, unfortunately, also dealt with issues that are very important. One is drought and water stress in Guyana, but we're hearing more about that throughout this region. I think everybody has been touched by that. And of course, we could not leave out the volcanic eruption of 2021 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which Kenton Chance had covered. But I encourage all of you who are online to please go to the website. You can download the book as well. And I expect that we're going to have many stories out of this. MIC's work has not stopped and will continue with regards to disaster risk and reduction regionally. And I was very happy to know that, I got a call one day from the British High Commission in Jamaica who said, look, we are making a donation. You've been asking about emergency equipment for media in times of disasters. And we were able to put together 7 kits and distribute them regionally. And that came out of what we saw in 2017 with Irma and Maria, and the fact that we decided we're not going to give up. We're going to be very persistent here, and we're going to get this funding. And we're hoping that we will be able to continue those kinds of projects and work with UNESCO on what they have been doing to build capacity. So I want to open the floor before I hop to the other question, because this is really about all of you who are in the media community in this region. You have an opportunity to speak to our journalists here, who I'm very extremely proud of. I know that I keep testing them and giving them challenges. Those of you who work with MIC, I know I do that, but I'm always so proud and happy to see what our end product is. So let me open the floor for questions at this point before we go back to some of the other questions I have. Who would like to go first? You'll have to use the raise hand feature, please. And I may need a little assistance from Inshan, who is our project lead in the background. I also saw that Paul put in the link for the upcoming training. And we had a little taste of this in our virtual sessions earlier this year. And let me tell you, there's no waste with knowledge. So I hope that all of you will apply, because more and more this kind of reporting is necessary. And as they say, information saves lives. And I'm sure that that is what it will do. Any questions from the floor? I see that we have one in the chat. Mr. Franklin, what can government and policymakers do to combat these issues? Well, I think that, SEDEMA is the entity in the region, and UNDRR has also been very active. And I think that what has to happen is the civil society organizations and media, those of us who are on this, we need to get the policymakers to understand what the challenges are with communicating with the public. We have a role to play as media in that what we write and what we say and what we do acts as a form of advocacy and helps prompt and spur that kind of action that we want to see on behalf of the publics that we serve. And so I think that that is a first start. But I know that SEDEMA has been meeting and working through the various offices of disaster management throughout the region. And this publication is pivotal with regard to that because very often the public awareness and sensitivity may not be clearly understood on the side of the policymakers. And so this is how we alert them, how we allow them to better understand what is happening on the ground. And that's why we've done what we've done. Any questions? Haley Anderson, I don't know if that's a clap or a question. I need my glasses. If we have no questions from the floor, I'm going to go back to the questions I have. So, Roseanne, you have a question. Roseanne?
Hi, good morning, all. I have a question and I have an observation. First of all, very good work to the entire team. I have read the document and it is outstanding. Congratulations. Regarding what Wesley said about parachute journalists, it is a reality. And unfortunately, it continues to happen. And it continues to happen in an environment where local and regional authorities and public officials, it often seems, would rather speak to the outsiders than speak to the local journalists. I mean, there's stories that you might be trying to get information from public officials and others, and it's not forthcoming, but let somebody from CNN or one of the other international media houses come in, and even if it is a story that's dealing with corruption or anything like that, they will answer those difficult questions. So it's still a hurdle that we're trying to overcome. Now, my question is to the journalists. We often are there in the midst of the disaster, we're covering the event, the hurricane, the earthquake, but to what extent are you satisfied that the media covers the event after the post? And by this, I mean where funds might be allocated by the international community or even government saying that they're going to spend X amount of money to build back to whatever. How do we follow up? What is your rating of how we as the media follow up?
I don't know who wants to take that. I'm about to give it a call, I think, in alphabetical order.
Gosh, next time I'm going to middle name as the main name for the lineup, so I'll get called last. Thanks for your question. So for the flooding that I reported on, the 2018 flooding, I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that there was a sustained effort to follow up, and even I think this happened in 2018. I think there was a 5 years later story that actually followed up on it. And because it was such a significant flooding event, it basically never happened before. They called it the mother of all floods. I think every flood season, it tends to be referenced to sort of avoid another Greenville, avoid another flood disaster like that. So it's still, there is, and I guess because it happened so recently, there's still some sort of top of mind awareness. But I do think that this was probably because it was such an outlying event that there was a sustained effort to continue following up on it. But it's not the same for all floods. And I think part of it comes with all disasters really. And I think part of it comes because of I guess, what is relevant in the news cycle at that point in time. And I guess, flooding is not, it happens so often that I guess it's not considered to be front page news or something like that. So I think while there is an effort, and unfortunately it tends to be when it's a particularly significant event, there is not enough sustained coverage of these events. And I think that that is something that needs to be, I suppose, also there should be advocacy within the newsroom from journalists when they see that these are events that need to be covered, because it's gonna keep happening. And also to somehow, I guess we need to figure out how to make disaster preparedness sexy, because it's only sexy after the fact, which is unfortunate. As Wesley mentioned, disaster porn, but I personally prefer no disaster. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla. Alicia, you had your hand up. Did you want to respond to this question as well?
Sure, I did. So I'll start from the beginning. Roseanne mentioned that a lot of governmental agencies tend to focus on the international media, be it with disasters or corruption. They often get the stories that we spend years trying to get a response to. Now, in relation to disaster, one of the things that information is dependent on is the Freedom of Information Act. Dominica specifically does not have a Freedom of Information Act. And in places where there are Freedom of Information Act, sometimes you still don't get the information that you're looking for. A lot of times we have to sit and wait on the external agencies, probably Caribbean Development Bank and so on, the World Bank, to publish some of the information that we're asking for, because our governments do not routinely give that information out. Secondly, there's a lack of knowledge and expertise on how to go about addressing the curiosities of journalists, because we have questions, but we don't know how to go about finding the answers and then interpreting it back to our audience. I remember, as I said, I was in Dominica in 2015, and it didn't cross my mind immediately to address what happened maybe a year down the line or 2 years down the line. I was super focused on what's happening now, who do we need to speak to, what happened to them, and so on, because I didn't have the expertise or the knowledge or the skill at the time to think that far. And so there's always the issue of upskilling and journalists seeking out ways to know more, to get more information. And if you don't know, ask a friend, hey, I have this idea, what should I do? Of course, we live in a very politicized region, whether people want to admit it or not. And there is a political unwillingness sometimes by journalists to tackle certain stories because it will make their pal rep look bad, or it will make their friend look bad that they grew up with. And so there's a reluctance, because if money is missing, for example, for relief aid, and your pal rep was in the vicinity when it happened, just that in itself and mentioning the pal rep in that space might get you excommunicated. And of course, we work in small newsrooms. We do not have enough resources. We do not have the time, because things are just going by. We don't have specialized journalists to say, okay, this is the disaster team. No, the disaster happens and then we have to move on to other things that affect people all the time. So it's a plethora of challenges that we have in the region. Equipment just being, I think, one of the many aspects.
Thanks for that, Alicia. Now, I know that Linda and Teresa want to chime in, but in the interest of time, ladies, forgive me, I'm going to hop to the question from Joanne, who has her hand up. Joanne, if you can open your microphone and let's see if we can answer.
My question had to do with several people commented on sort of the malaise, the laid backness in terms of I guess, community response. I wonder, part of what I observe anecdotally is that there's also a heightened stress level for the duration of hurricane season that can affect people's, because you can't live on one all the time. So I think people kind of, as a sort of coping mechanism, disassociate to a degree in order to be able to get up every day and function. And that might be a factor. I know, for instance, just anecdotally, I know, for instance, when the Met Office puts out a thing, I know of one person who literally has a negative reaction because it feels to them like the only time they hear from this Met Office person is the sky is falling. And so there's an almost instinctive reaction that way. So is there a way that reporters think about this, that climate change is real? All these disasters are part of our lives. How can we deal with it every day from a reporting standpoint, as opposed to only responding to the crisis point of it, if you get my point? So that idea of the stress level, I wonder if it's something that we consider in terms of how people respond to these disasters or don't respond.
Let me bring in our Vice President at MIC, Mr. Wesley Gibbings. Wesley?
Yeah, there's a very good point that Joanne raised there. But our takeaway as practicing journalists from this ought to be, in addition to understanding that people are operating under situations of acute stress, some of which might not even be related to perils and disasters. They may have to do with all kinds of political dynamics, all kinds of other stresses and strains. But the takeaway for us as journalists ought to be this point about self-care. There should be an onus of responsibility on us as individuals and as communities of journalists, as members of newsrooms, to ensure that there's a high level of care among ourselves and with ourselves to ensure that we survive as human beings, because we all have families and we all live in communities, but also that we are in an emotional state of being to competently cover the crises facing us.
Thanks for that, Wesley. Very well said. I know I'm a culprit of non-self-care, but I'm trying to get there day by day. We have a question from another Teresa. Miss Teresa Hope is asking, is there more the media can do to package information to drive behavioral change rather than just sensitization and transfer of information? I don't know who wants to take that one from the panel, but I think that's a very good question. Esther?
Yeah, I wanted to tackle that a little bit, and from the point of view of mis and disinformation. I think that when a crisis comes out, a lot of information comes out. A lot of information that is not necessarily true, or it's from another disaster or something like that. And I think the way that we can address it is by having a campaigns on media literacy and critical thinking. And that's something that you could do throughout the year, so that when people see things, they can understand what they need to do to read what is coming to them, to see what is coming to them, and to really address what is coming to them. I think that's important. So that is something that you could do throughout the year, is tackle media literacy and tackle critical thinking. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Esther. Alicia?
I'm curious to ask her to kind of expand on what she means when she says, rather than just sensitization and the transfer of information, because in the asking of that question, it seems to me that some of that work has to be done by national disaster services. I think one of the things that people tend to forget when they deal with journalists is that we're human beings as well. So when a storm is coming and you want to stock up your home, so do we. when a storm hits, we also have psychological issues, not only because we're dealing with our family stuff or something happened to our homes, but we still have to go out there and address and speak to people and be sensitive about certain things. So I wanted them to kind of clarify what they mean in terms of the role that media has to play in that space.
I don't know if Ms. Teresa Hope wants to put on her microphone.
Yes, just to add to a point, I do support what my colleague Alicia is saying about, the idea of, yes, packaging, but also that we have our own personal issues that we too have to ensure that ours is in order before, moving on. But one of the, in terms of packaging information, some media houses would have started, okay, for instance, and the Antigua and Barbuda Broadcasting Services, there's a feature around the start of the season where it's Stay Alert, where we not only just look at different agencies, different individuals and so forth, try to go in a little bit more of a deep dive into information and looking at the various entities. How do they prepare? How can you at home prepare? And it's like a standalone feature around this time every year to at least get residents in that space and a reminder. And also just this week I was in collaboration with the Sedima, where we're looking now as to start the conversation through partnership again, networking with the journalists as to how to do PSAs, public service announcements, and try to create this atmosphere where disaster is a year-round topic. So hopefully in terms of making it a month-by-month awareness, this is what happens, this is what must be done, these are the agencies, these are what they provide, that could perhaps start the conversation. But then there's also the issue of personal behavior and personal awareness. And I think that is a culture too that would have to be changed at some point, because the message is there, but some individuals are just complacent. So the media has a role, yes, but it also comes on an individual and your personal responsibility.
Thanks for that. Linda?
Hey, good morning again. What I wanted to say, Elisha actually said part of it. We cannot ignore and forget the role of National Disaster Organization in our region. You look at the Facebook page of the disaster organization throughout, let's say we're going to use just the OECS, for example. You do not see anything throughout the year until June, where the first thing you see is about the preparedness for National Disaster Preparedness Week, which happens in May. And the next time you will most likely hear something quite forcing from them, aggressive, trying to get your attention, is that a tropical storm is coming or a hurricane is coming. To the point where if I was to just look back at Grenada when Beryl was coming, it was so insignificant that even our prime minister decided he was going to go enjoy cricket when the law itself of the national disaster say within 72 hours of any notification from the relevant body, the NEAC, that is the National Council, need to meet and make decision as to whether you need to shut down business and so. And that did not happen. So we cannot ignore the role of how we package this thing. And then the other side of it, our National Disaster Management Agency always say they are the official voice, and the official voice is not saying anything. And as a result, people go and take things from the National Weather Center, or in one case, they were circulating a release that was like 2, 3, 4 years old, but had the same name of the. This is what happened when we ignore that important role of our National Disaster Agency. People are just literally left on their own, and they are not sensitized year round, because besides hurricane, which we all focus on, we have earthquakes, which are happening a lot of. In the last week, there were a whole lot of phenomena in the sea. Trinidad seems up to yesterday was one in Grenada, and we are seeing things happen. And so that focus just on the hurricane season, it need to be done away with, and our disaster management agency need to focus on all the disaster that can happen, from oil spill to a tornado coming or passing through our waters.
I agree with you on that point, Linda. Let's move to Carla. Carla, you have some feedback for us.
Yes, first of all, I just wanted to endorse what all my colleagues are saying because I fully agree with them. One of the things I think is a universal journalist experience is when somebody will be like, but I didn't read that, and then you point out to them, it's here. The news not reporting it. The news has reported it. I think that with regards to behavioral change, I think there needs to be a collaboration rather between media and national institutions, because I think in some way it's still seen as separate. I think it was Linda who just mentioned that people might not, if they don't trust or believe what the national institutions might say, they'd go and find information somewhere else. I think that it they're not two separate entities. We all have one goal, which is to reduce the risk, to mitigate the risk for disasters. So there needs to be more collaboration among the stakeholders to really unite to sort of come up with a cohesive messaging that can engender that behavioral change. So it's rather than thinking of the media as one entity, national institutions as one entity, even NGOs as one entity, everybody should come together and actually probably try and create a national disaster relief plan. So everybody's on the same page. And I think that's probably one of the best ways to start thinking about behavioral change.
Yeah, Carla, that point about having a national disaster plan. We also know what happens in some of our countries. I will not name any country that I am from, but sometimes it takes very long, like over a decade. But having said that, let me move to Wesley.
Well, I think Rosanna's had her hand up for a little while now, and I don't want her to be vexed with me.
Roseanne, my apologies. I couldn't see everybody. Roseanne, you there? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yes, to pick up where Carla left off. Yes, it's good if we can have all the agencies and all the players coming together, but I still think that even in the absence of that connectivity, because it doesn't exist right now, it would seem, we as the media can still do much more. Media houses, and I know they're small in small Caribbean countries, Trinidad and Jamaica, Guyana might be the exceptions, but a media house is much more than just the journalists. It's the marketing arm, it's the advertising arm. I think that we as media houses can put together PSAs. We can do much more than just report on the story, because I think we can all agree that repeated exposure is what changes behavior. So people it has to be drummed into the heads of people in a way that they would be willing to accept it, right? And I think that with repeated exposure and repetition, it can happen. We, the media, we can use multiple platforms, the videos, the graphics, the articles, and it doesn't have to come from collaboration with the agencies. UNESCO, they just had an initiative where PSAs were put out, and that did not involve the agencies as far as I know. You can correct me if I'm wrong. It was strictly within the media houses and with media professionals. So rather than sitting back and saying they're not collaborating with us, I think there's much more that we can do as organizations. But I somehow get the sense that climate change is not really on the radar of most media houses in the Caribbean. Yes, it's on the radar when something happens like a hurricane or whatever, and we say, oh, hurricanes are getting worse because of climate change. But to say that within each newsroom in the Caribbean, there's a dedicated climate change, climate disaster person, I'd be very surprised if that turns out to be the case. But I'm hoping that as we go along, we will definitely do much better.
Thanks for that,
Thanks for that,
Crises. Wesley, let me bring you in and then we'll go to Philomene.
Yeah, I just wanted to say very quickly, yes, there's a huge responsibility on the part of media houses themselves to do some of this. But I'm aware, and Kiran, I saw smile because I know in the case of her own media enterprise that this is done, it's par for the course, that in the event of maybe in Trinidad and Tobago, we think we're invincible when it comes to hurricanes and storms or whatever it is. In fact, that's read my column on Wednesday. But I think that for the most part, media enterprises are aware of their responsibility. But I wanted to come back to this thing about collaboration with the disaster agencies. It would have been like 20 years ago when the ACM met with CIDEMA. And one of the things that we put on the table was that at times of disaster or some crisis, that media be appointed, if not at the status of, but near the status of first responders. So access to disaster sites, and general access to areas where there might be crisis, different situations, if only for purposes of letting the rest of the country know what's happening. Because the relief workers are going in there to try to find survivors, to alleviate the situation. Their focus is not on communicating what's going on. But journalists need to be accorded that status. I know that there is a lot of apprehension about designating media people as first responders, but I think that some perhaps intermediate status that comes close to first responders should be there. So even if there have been instances, and I'm sorry that Kenton isn't on the call, I mean, Kenton has personally hopped the ship and the helicopter and so on to be there, and the kinds of challenges that he himself has faced and several other journalists have faced because there's no sort of quote unquote official status. So I think that's something to be looked at as well.
Thanks, Wesley. Let me hop over to Philomena. Philomena, floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be participating in this forum this morning. I just wanted to elaborate on the point that Linda raised because I think it's very important. And it may have been raised before as well, the need for year-round sensitization and information sharing. I previously worked in the BVI as the Information and Education Manager at the Department of Disaster Management. And we had such a plan in place. So like every month we had a particular focus and we conducted, various programs, shared various material based on a certain theme every month. And also we aligned things that we did to internationally recognized days. For example, International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. So I honestly think it's important and we should push that for that to be in place so that, because oftentimes the criticism is that all you hear about is hurricanes, and we know that's not the only risk that we face. Another point I wanted to underscore is the need for collaboration among stakeholders. Collaboration with telecommunication companies in terms of disseminating messages. I think in the BVI as well, to draw on that experience, we had what we called a safe school program, and which evolved into a smart school program. And we brought like disaster risk reduction information into the schools. So you're starting to share that information from very young. And we know that once we give children information, they would bring it to the home. So I think those are a couple of things that we need to look at and to advocate for on a continuous basis.
Thanks. Dr. Paul Hector had his hand up. I just want to be courteous and extend the floor to you before I move to Alicia.
Oh, thank you very much, Kiran. I just wanted to share with you that recently we have actually been having discussions with CIDEMA around the possibilities linked to, for example, areas like documentary heritage preservation specialists being included on these sort of rosters, and also for media to be part of that team that goes on. We will see how these conversations evolve. but it's something which is flagged as something which is of critical importance for the region. Thank you.
Thank you. And rest assured, if it's happening, MIC will be there to alert everyone as we work closely with UNESCO on this front. Alicia, I hand over to you. You had some comments for us.
Yes, it's regarding the collaboration. Roseanne mentioned that we could go ahead as media houses and put out PSAs without the stakeholders. And while that is a possibility, in my opinion, those would be very mundane PSAs without the stakeholders. Telling somebody, oh, dock here or don't drive up here, nobody's listening to that. Those are the PSAs that we've been seeing year after year after year, and nobody's listening. You're not reaching the right audience. Where collaboration comes in is not to say that the stakeholders or the national disaster offices have to hold your hand and you have to get their permission every time you have to do something. Is in a number of areas. One, I've worked in newsrooms where you have journalists who don't understand what is being said, for example, by the National Hurricane Center. All right. If I say something is longitude XYZ and latitude XYZ and it's northwest of here, they don't know how to apply it locally. Firstly, so they don't understand the nuances. Oftentimes when media houses go out on their own and they try to either do PSAs or these campaigns where it relates to disaster, they often butt heads with the disaster agencies who say, well, you don't understand the nuance and the context of this isn't right because you don't know this information and that information. So working with them is absolutely essential. It's not to say we cannot, do regular PSAs, but if you want it to be effective, you have to work with the disaster agencies. For example, I did a report on flooding from Tropical Storm Jerry that just passed in Antigua. And one of the things that I mentioned was that NODS in Antigua would have done some work excavating these areas, but it didn't prevent the flooding. The next day I got a photo from NODS saying, well, yes, it's less flooding, but hey, there's a big blue barrel blocking the drainage way over there that exacerbated that flooding. So if I ran that story and it had zero context, I'm going to get a call saying, well, you did it wrong. And then it makes it difficult in future to work with disaster agencies when you kind of go ahead and try to contextualize things without them. But yes, I do understand we can do a lot more, but again, it really comes down to knowledge base and the assistance of stakeholders.
Thanks for that, Alicia. And as we were talking about the PSAs, I did drop the link in the chat to our YouTube page. And I want you all to know that the way we did all of that content is, yes, some of it is ideal for TV, but also we looked at things like social media, so TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. And also the way that the TV was done, all of it can also be used on radio. So you have radio PSAs there. But all of the TV stuff, the audio can be pulled as well and used for radio. That was part of the entire process of how we produced the finished scripts and the finished PSCs. And they're all free. And that is why it's important to note, because all of us, or most of us, are working in smaller media houses based on the names I'm familiar with in this group. And we know it's difficult for us to produce this content. And that's why UNESCO decided to get in and support this effort. I wanted to ask a question to everyone who is here on this call. And that is, by show of hands, how many of you actually have a plan should a disaster hit? A plan at your office, and your offices have done disaster risk assessments. Just show of hands. Nothing too scientific. I'm giving you another 5 seconds. Just show of hand if you have a disaster risk plan and you've done an assessment. Okay, giving everybody 1 more second. 6 hands up, or mine would make it 7. And we have 45 people on the call, so an average of 1 out of 7. So that speaks volumes for what is happening. And I actually do not think that that is a proportion that is not probably realistic when you think about it. 1 out of 7 could possibly be correct. So that shows you how much work we actually have to do out there in our communities and collaboratively, as we've been saying, with the authorities, with other civil society groups, and with the multilateral agencies who are present in our countries. Earlier in the discussion, the whole challenge with freedom of information was mentioned. And Alicia, I believe you are the one who brought it up. And I just wanted to make the point that, MIC has been advocating for freedom of information legislation, access to information legislation regionally, but even in our countries who do have it, it needs to be a little more robust and user-friendly. And so that link has also been posted, and UNESCO has been doing a great deal of work in that regard, and that is also posted in the chat. So I encourage all of you to look at it. But for those of you who want to do stories now on what is happening, and you find that you're hitting a rock with getting the information, there is the FOI help desk at MIC. It's a simple form you fill out, and we can try to give you some guidance on what you can do. So I see Wesley has his hand up. Wesley?
Just very quickly, I wanted to acknowledge the presence of Professor Richie Robertson, who is on the call, and hopefully he will chime in at some stage. The work he did in St. Vincent and the Grenadines during the volcanic crisis is seminal from the standpoint of sharing information at times of crisis. So just wanted to acknowledge him.
Thanks for that, Wesley. I don't know if he's in a position to speak, but I would welcome any comments he has for us on this issue. Professor Robinson, would you like to speak, sir? Good morning.
I've been put on the spot, so I'm obliged to speak now. I was being very quiet and listening. Yeah, I think journalists and the work that you do is critical, and getting information out is critical. I think in the multi-hazard environment that we live in the Caribbean, I think one of the things that the disaster management community have to bear in mind increasingly, I think you're saying that, is that you have to get information out there to people. And in the absence of information, people create stories their own selves. And in these days of instant journalists, each of us with an iPhone, you create stories that you then end up chasing. So we would always recommend, and at Seismic, we always try to have a very good relationship with media people, and we try to put information out there. One of the challenges we had, as you would realize, one of the challenges we always have is to get the stories out there before the story creates something that you can't really stop. And it's difficult for agencies like ourselves to do it because our mandate doesn't really provide us with the resources to do it. We have done it a lot more because we have deliberately realized from our experience that we have to make sure people are aware. But I don't think a lot of scientific organizations like ourselves would find it difficult to do a lot of the outreach work that we do. And one of the things I think I would like to see more of is, and I'm hearing it from some of the conversation I'm hearing, is that the media and the journalists work a lot more collaboratively with the disaster management community to get the stories that is correct out there. And I've heard comment about the fact that the disaster management community like to think of themselves as the authoritative source. And I get the critique that if you are the authoritative source, therefore your voice have to be out there. I think one of the challenges that they all have, as we do, is that, again, we live in a resource-constrained environment, and their mandate is to respond to emergencies. Their mandate, they tend to find it hard, therefore, to have to be pushing out information, while the environment that they live in, if they don't do that, they then spend a lot of time trying to control the story. And so I understand the challenges from both ends. You guys have a story that you have you're a journalist, you have a certain mandate, a certain role that you play, which I think is critical. And the disaster management group and ourselves as scientists have different roles and responsibilities. I would go with us trying to find a way in which we could work more collaboratively together, recognizing that we all have a certain amount of restraints and a certain amount of constraints in terms of both our roles and also the resources. So I like the conversation. I've been looking at all the links. I'm going to make sure that our outreach team, who I don't think any of them, I just happened to found out about this this thing and registered and say I'd listen while I'm doing something, and then make sure that they're aware of the information that is out there and see if we could utilize it. As I said, we always are interested in working with journalists to get the stories out. But I know that, I have a love-hate relationship with journalists, that, I know what your mandate is and your role is, but, you have to understand what mine is too. And as you see, what we did in St. Vincent was essentially we were trying to make sure that the story gets out and trying to stay ahead of it. One of the things that we spent a lot of time doing is trying to correct incorrect information that was out there. And we also tried, if we say we are the authoritative source of information, we also tried to get that information out. If we don't do that, then we can't really be vexed with your finding a story that's interested and doing with it what you wish. We could only blame ourselves, right? As I said, I didn't plan to. I was trying to be very quiet. So you put me on the spot, Wesley. So that's my comments. But keep up the good work. We'd love to work with you, and I think we'd continue to try as best we can to work with you collaboratively. Thank you very much. I'll keep quiet now.
Thank you, Professor, so much for that. I think that was well said. I have to admit that after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, that 2017 experience, regionally, I did see a lot more activation and interest from our disaster preparedness management authorities. Particularly, I have more intimate knowledge, of course, of what has happened in Trinidad and what is happening in Jamaica, but I definitely saw that. And I think that they have been trying to embrace media more. But I think sometimes it is left up to us folks, as journalists, to be more persistent and more consistent, perhaps, with the information we are requesting and getting the answers to certain things so that we keep the public not just sensitive to what is happening, but aware. I think awareness is a big aspect. In our casebook, we did not do anything on earthquakes in particular, and that is because we know that there's a lot of information circulating on what happened in Haiti, and I wanted to reference a great simulation program on Haiti. If you just Google Haiti simulation, Government of Canada, I think it will come up. I will try and find the link and post it shortly, but I think it's very important to look at that. If I had my way, I would say to every single media worker to look at that, because that simulation really paints the picture of the kinds of scenarios that we could face, the dangers and the types of decisions we have to make. So I wanted to mention that and ensure everybody sees it, because my greatest fear is earthquake. That is the one thing that really gets me scared. And if you go into my home and you ask my family, the fastest time I've made down the staircase, they'll tell you any shake that there is in the house. So I throw that out. It's real. There's a lot more seismic activity in our region, and I hope that you all are paying attention to it. Media and information literacy also came up. And this, I think, is one of the central challenges for all media in the era of mis and disinformation. And we need to understand how we are educating our public on how they take information and look at it critically. Because it is a plague, it is not going to go away. And we know that everybody becomes an expert because they have online and social media access. And that is the disadvantage, that is the evil in it. But at the same time, it is a very useful and powerful tool for everyone. So we really need to educate them on how we do that. And of course, it is becoming more and more significant as we enter this new world of artificial intelligence and what is happening with AI. So I had to make those points and remind everyone to please pay attention. So we're about to wrap up. I don't know if there are any more questions from the floor. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to raise your hand. If not, I'm going to have our authors and journalists give the last word. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. So I'm going to start in alphabetical order. So this is the question. It's a trick question. I didn't really give you all any heads up that this was coming. But I always like to ask people, if you had a magic wand, how would you fix? What is the one thing you would fix? So if you had a magic wand, what is the one thing you would fix in ensuring that there is effective communication and the media can fulfill its role given the case study you did? Carla?
If I had a magic wand, world peace. But in terms of communication, we had the discussion, and I have to say I agree, especially with collaboration. And I think that that would probably be, for me, the most fundamental element in terms of effective communication, which would be that collaboration among all stakeholders, because it's not just about media understanding what it's not just about media getting access. It's also from the media perspective, the media understanding the process and logistics that are involved so we can accurately relate that. But on the other side, for the official agencies, the media already has the infrastructure in place to get communication out quickly and effectively and across multiple platforms. So there's that symbiosis there that there is relevance in collaboration. And I think and then there's also the catch-all in terms of trust. Some people might trust the government, some people might trust the media. So put together, we will effectively be able to communicate the message to as many people and as accurately as possible. Everybody will make mistakes, but the important thing is if the information gets to one person who can, and it can make a difference, then, we will have succeeded. The second thing would probably be technical training and resources for journalists to just be better prepared to cover these things. Somebody, I can't recall who, mentioned just the understanding of like technical language and scientific language, because we will get all these complicated results, these complicated reports, but if we don't know how to interpret the data, then it's useless to basically everybody that we're sharing it to. So again, I understand that some people might get annoyed with journalists. Oh, they're getting this wrong, and they contributing to the problem, but we want to get better. And as I said before, the goal is for a safer and better prepared public. And that is why I think that if we can put aside whatever differences we have, world peace, then we can effectively communicate better, because this is not a problem that is going to go away. So we need to figure it out as early as we can.
Thank you, Carla. Alicia, anything you wanted to add?
Everything that Carla said, the fact that the collaboration is also needed to streamline the communication in the sense that we need stronger and more credible information systems amongst the journalists and all the stakeholders. Again, a lot of times we see influencers and persons wanting a reaction from social media posting, but if that collaboration bring about a system where there's credible information, you know which newsroom to go to, you know which disaster agency they're linked to, then I think that will do us a world of justice.
Thanks, Alicia. Esther, you're on mute.
If I had a magic wand, I think the most obvious thing would be more staff and more money. And so that you can really dedicate to investigative journalism. I think it's important to do the follow-ups, as was mentioned, and to have relationships with people. So if you have a beat, you'll be able to understand the topic area and to have a relationship with the experts and sources and so forth. And so with more money and with more people, I think that you can have a unit that does and dedicates itself to investigative journalism.
Thank you, Esther. Let me hop to Linda.
Hi. Magic wand is the key word, and if I had one that I could have used, I would snap my fingers and take them back to the 50s and let it have a journey come towards the year 2024. And the residents, it would be our residents, as well as the people who have business there, they would experience for themselves how the sea is slowly moving inland, and whatever is happening is not the fault of a politician, but it takes a politician and others to mend what is happening. So when they see what is happening, they will now understand why they need to relocate, why they not to build for the things on the beach. And so because they will now leave that experience, they themselves will become champion of saying, this is how I am living through it, I'm living with it, and take action for future generation. That is what my magic wand would do.
Thanks, Linda. And I'm hearing a desktop documentary there, so actually it's not difficult to do. Teresa?
I would want to join with my colleagues in terms of collaboration, and we have powerful entities like Media Institute of the Caribbean, which make it easier to collaborate. I think sometimes we forget the power we have as journalists and our authority when it comes to shaping and assisting where history is concerned, collaborating more, working together. If I need some information in Barbados or there's something in Antigua and Barbuda that I can link to Esther, this is what's happening, where can I go, what are some of the useful tools that I can use, collaborating together and creating a greater, more powerful force, I think is key to getting the information out and getting that conversation and keeping it going.
Thank you, Teresa. And you're absolutely right about the network. I mean, to date, we looked at the figures last week, and it's over 130 media houses and over 580 journalists have gone through MIC's programs and are part of that. I want to thank all of you for taking the time this morning. I want to allow Dr. Paul Hector to give some closing remarks before I tell you how you can access this video.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I wasn't really expecting, but anyway, I'm very happy with the turnout that we've had today. We've had, I think, very great sharing of experiences, lessons. We've also touched on a number of very important but also influential areas. We've talked, for example, about the need for preparedness. We've talked about the need for MIL skills, media and information literacies, to combat disinformation and misinformation. We've touched on an extremely important issue, that of mental health, and the need for us to invest more in that, to recognize both the power of positive attitudes, but also the reality that things like depression, worry, stress can also impact journalists. And that is also part of the sort of toolkit. We need to have more conversations around this. We've talked also about the need for access to information laws, because again, this plays a very key role in helping to make sure that journalists, media houses have the facts, the evidence that they can then use to help inform communities. And the last point I'd like to mention from today is the need for us to have alliances with national broadcasters national disaster preparedness authorities, and also the regional ones like SEDEMA, so we can be that sort of trusted intermediary. And if I just want to piggyback on what everyone said in terms of what I think is important for UNESCO to do, and which I commit to continuing to do, and that is really to help local media and national media, regional media to provide communities with timely, trusted, and actionable disaster information. And I see there are four ways in which UNESCO, through our work, we can continue to do this. And this is, of course, training journalists in disaster reporting. It's really important to equip media houses with the protective gear and equipment so that their staff can really go out safely. And then, of course, the necessary technical equipment, and of course, key content. And again, those links with disaster agencies so that media has a much more firmly established place so that they can speak from a position of strength. So thank you for this opportunity. It's really been a pleasure, and look forward to continuing to collaborate and work with all of you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Folks, thank you all for taking the time, 90 minutes. Our time is up. I want to say that we will be continuing this discussion in other ways, and there will be information. You are on our mailing list and you will get it. This video is going to be up on our YouTube page by this evening. Our project lead who's in the background is Mr. Inshan Bakridi. Inshan, thank you very much for working on this over the past year, and with all of the teams. I cannot forget him because he really is the anchor for this project. When I am not around and unavailable, I cannot leave him out. And to those of you who heard media and information literacy mentioned, MIC is joining our colleagues in the Latin American region. We do have a webinar on the 15th and 16th. So this week, that information and the flyer will be posted to you, and it will be posted to our social media feeds shortly, so that you can join in the discussion, because AI is part of that discussion, along with how communities throughout the Latin American and Caribbean region have been dealing with mis and disinformation on what some of the outstanding projects are. And again, that was possible through the support of UNESCO. So friends, thank you all. Please spread the word, be safe, and enjoy the rest of your week. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.